TIL, J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis both once went to a party dressed as polar bears. It was not a fancy dress party. They should have checked their outfits beforehand, to avoid such an embarrassing situation. Tolkien also once ran through a street in only a loincloth, IIRC, screaming in Icelandic, occasionally dressed as an axe-wielding Anglo-Saxon warrior, and chased his neighbor down the road. The man was quite interesting when he wanted to be. Edit credit goes to you/fudge3 for actually reading the article when I was working from memory. And it was probably Old English instead of Icelandic he was shouting in. C.S. Lewis was born on this day in 1898. The article has 0 dates on it. You know what though, there's never enough polar bears at any of the parties I attend, so I think they were onto something. Well, one of us is gonna have to change. Well, obviously, or the polar bears would have been in tuxes. If anyone gets the chance, read the Screwtape Letters. It's a one-sided letter correspondence of a demon giving advice to his nephew on how to corrupt humans. It was serialized in a newspaper and it's brilliant. If these guys were alive today, they'd totally be the type of people who'd go to conventions as guests and cosplay so no one would recognize them. Why do Brits call costumes fancy dress? Every time I ask I just get yelled at and nobody gives me a real answer. Also, Tolkien modeled the character Treebeard off C.S. Lewis, https://www. Literary Traveler. com/article/Tolkien_Lewis_England/#text equals he %20 modeled %20 his %20 walking %2 docking the %20 silent %20 planet %2 c %20 on %20 Tolkien. And text equals the %20 camaraderie %20 between %20 Jack %20 and Lewis %20 book %20 the %24 %20 loves, who was known for his booming voice. Till a polar bear costume is a fancy dress. That statue of C.S. Lewis is round the corner from my old house in Belfast. Certainly, the eccentric sense of humor of the two writers is well known. According to Carpenter, Tolkien was also known to dress up as an axe-wielding Anglo-Saxon warrior and chase his bewildered neighbor down the road. What a legend! My brother said it would have been better if they went as one polar bear. Prompting the question, who would be the head? We agreed it would be Tolkien when we realized the chances were higher that he spoke polar bear. It was not a fancy dress party. Mad lads. It is worth noting that the word fancy in the title is meant in the British usage of fantasy/costume and not the American usage of ornate/formal. One guy in a polar bear costume would make me laugh. 2 guys would make my social anxiety ramp up, because at that point I'd be pretty certain that I missed the memo somehow. So were they polar opposites? So that party was bipolar. Of course it wasn't a fancy dress party, otherwise they would have dressed like penguins. Can we get a movie starring Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly as Tolkien and Lewis up to hijinks? Was it enough to break the ice? 2 best friends doing shenanigans. Tolkien also stole a bus at Oxford and drove around followed by a mob of people. r/madlads. Reminds me of when Adam West and Frank Gorshin were invited to attend a party and they decided to act as their Batman, 1960s, characters. Lo and behold, they got expelled from an orgy. The absolute mad lads. Maybe a comment about how everyone else, probably dressed in black tie, looked like penguins, whose habitat lies in the opposite pole. How many other world historical figures are going to be outed as furries? They need to make a buddy movie about those two. Tolkien and Lewis were furries. Till fancy dress party doesn't mean fancy clothes party. How embarrassing. It was once they entered. Me in a polar bear suit, I'm ready for this party. My parents looking horrified, this is your wedding. Tolkien got too much of that halfling pipeweed. And I want in. Fancy dress party. As in, it was not a costume party. /r/madlads. Tolkien was also known to dress up as an axe-wielding Anglo-Saxon warrior and chase his bewildered neighbor down the road. I want to live in a time where dressing up as a bear is considered fancy dress. Tolkien wrote letters to his children every year from Santa Claus. His letters included a couple of playful polar bears that helped Santa at the North Pole. Perhaps that's where he got the idea for the polar bear costume. Yes, it was very embarrassing. All night long people kept saying, "Are you J.R.R. or C.S.?" And all they could say was, "Roar." IIRC. They were real Viking polar bear skin cloaks they were allowed to take from one of the museums at Oxford since they were medievalists at the uni. Was it an icebreaker? I crashed a yoga party dressed as a pimp zombie. I know Tolkien used to write letters to his kids on Christmas as Santa Claus, and wound up inventing a whole North Pole EU before Lord of the Rings involving a talking polar bear central to the events. Maybe that had something to do with it. Lewis and Tolkien were basically IRL. Denny Crane and Alan Shore from Boston Legal. I have a first edition first printing of the North American release of Lewis's The Screwtape Letters. A very rare 1st/1st wartime book released in 1943. It is viewed as the book that launched C.S. Lewis in the literary limelight. He dedicated the book to J.R.R. Tolkien. Ironically, Tolkien didn't enjoy the book apparently. Oh wow, the thumbnail for this is taken quite literally 20 seconds from my house. I've smoked many a joint and shared many a drunken McDonald's with that statue. There are other more recently made statues also. I believe the Fawn, Aslan, and one or two others exist. C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were the Troy and Abed of the early mid-20th century. Wow, Reddit put C.S. Lewis on the front page. There may be hope still. No wonder people call it good old days. Hemingway told the nerds it was a costume party. Oldest trick in the book. It wasn't a fancy party but a furry party. When you find somebody at the party with your exact energy. But surely, dressing up as polar bears when it is a fancy dress party is just plain boring. Bipolar furry authors. Ladies and gentlemen, the man who wrote Mere Christianity. C.S. Lewis and I were just discussing how you and Jon Snow both know nothing. So people dressed as polar bears to fancy dress parties. I bet they were on drugs. Going out on a limb here. It was not a fancy dress party. No, I imagine it wasn't. Sounds like it was a Halloween party. I don't know why the title is like that. I wouldn't be that far out the blue to wear a funny costume at a fun event. But who's gonna wear a costume to a fancy event? Me, an American. Well yeah, how many people show up in a costume if the party is fancy? Wait a minute, realizes the British are at it again. I don't get the title. Wouldn't it be funnier if it was a fancy dress party? Why include the part about it not being one? I'm confused. You say that as if dressing like a polar bear would make sense at a fancy dress party. Maybe you're thinking of a costume party. TIL, I want a polar bear costume. Well, good thing they didn't come with fancy dresses then. Sounds pretty fancy to me. Was it a costume party? Who wore it better? What a couple of nerds. Yo, that picture is from C.S. Lewis Square here in Belfast. Was Philip Pullman not invited? Genius and madness. BFFs rolling hand in hand. Weren't they college roommates though? Would that make bipolar? Op's name is a thread about these authors. Both of them were friends. They're also fucking weirdos. Read that as it was a fancy dress party and immediately needed photos. That's funny, I thought they were polar opposites. So they were the Tolkien bear guests. Fun fact, Tolkien strongly disliked the Beatles because they inspired a group of teenagers next door to take up music, and they were horrible. So he had to listen to their racket constantly. The odds of that being a coincidence are astronomical. Life goals. Why does this fact reminds me of that M.O. Willems Elephant and Piggy book? To me, the bigger till is that Lewis' middle name was apparently Staples. Wait. The same party? And it wasn't planned beforehand? 'Cause that's a bit awkward. That's why I have joined this subreddit. I always learn something new, just like it says.